to our colleague Frank Walter for his help and assistance in this process and his participation as a member of the ISSG. I also want to thank all the member countries that understood the importance of our meeting here today. Foreign Minister Wang Yi flew all the way from China. We had a strong presence of all the ministers because everybody understood the importance of this particular moment with respect to Syria. Last fall, the International Syria Support Group came together out of a shared sense of responsibility for the nightmare that the Syrian people have been enduring for far too long. And in December, we agreed on a set of commitments unanimously endorsed by the UN Security Council aimed at bringing an end to the war. Obviously, it's been difficult. Everybody understands that. That effort at the UN led to specific UN-sponsored negotiations between the Syrian parties, which began under the stewardship of UN envoy Staffan de Mistura and the UN itself. And everybody knows that as the situation on the ground in Syria grew steadily worse, the talks themselves became wrapped up in the level of violence and in concerns that people had about negotiating under difficult circumstances. Staffan de Mistura, wisely at that moment, after conversing with both sides in what were always scheduled to be proximity talks, then delayed this process knowing that we were meeting here in Munich yesterday and part of this morning. During this time, the perception of many members was that the regime of Bashar al-Assad was violating international law by trying to force surrender through starvation. And with the help of indiscriminate bombing, the regime intensified its assault in Aleppo, killing civilians and forcing more than 60,000 Syrians to flee their homes in search of refuge across the Turkish border. And it is our perception that rather than hurting Daesh, this process has in fact empowered Daesh to take advantage of the chaos. UN Special Envoy de Mistura, who convened those talks, agreed that we should come here to Munich in order to allow the ISSG nations and the parties themselves to try to make the necessary progress to bring about humanitarian access that is urgently needed on the ground and in trying to implement a ceasefire on both sides. Foreign Minister Lavrov worked closely with me and with the rest of the members today, and I'm pleased to say that as a result, today in Munich, we believe we have made progress on both the humanitarian front and the cessation of hostilities front. And these two fronts, this progress, has the potential, fully implemented, fully followed through on, to be able to change the daily lives of the Syrian people. First, we have agreed to accelerate and expand the delivery of humanitarian aid beginning immediately. Sustained delivery will begin this week. First, to the areas where it is most urgently needed, Deir ez-Zor, Fuad, Kafraya, the besieged areas of rural Damascus, Madaya, Mudaniya, Kafir Batna, and then to all the people in need throughout the country, particularly in the besieged or hard-to-reach areas, the smaller neighborhoods and towns. This access is specifically called for in UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and to ensure that it is fully implemented. The United Nations will convene a task force made up of members of the ISSG and of relevant UN entities and of countries that have an influence on the parties particularly. And this working group will meet tomorrow in Geneva. It will ensure that humanitarian access is granted by all sides to all people who require help. And it will meet, as I said, for the first time tomorrow. It will report weekly on progress or lack thereof to help ensure a consistent and timely and approved access moving forward. I will say that it was unanimous. Everybody today agreed on the urgency of humanitarian access. And what we have here are words on paper. What we need to see in the next few days are actions on the ground in the field. And Stefan will speak to that. In addition, the ISSG members will work together with the Syrian parties to ensure the immediate approval and the completion of all pending UN access requests. As everybody knows, there have been about 114 of them, only 13 or so, 14 approved, and that has to change. Second, we have agreed to implement a nationwide cessation of hostilities to begin in a target of 1 week's time. That's ambitious, but everybody is determined to move as rapidly as possible to try to achieve this. This will apply to any and all parties in Syria, with the exception of the terrorist organizations Daesh and al-Nusra, and any other terrorist organization designated by the Security Council. To that end, we have also established a task force under the auspices of the UN and co-chaired by Russia and the United States. And over the coming week, this group will work to develop the modalities for a long-term, comprehensive, and durable cessation of violence, of hostilities. We will begin to exercise our influence by the commitment of every country at the table immediately for a significant reduction in violence as we work towards the full cessation of hostilities. Now, I want to underscore, putting an end to the violence and the bloodshed is obviously essential, as is providing Syrians who are starving the humanitarian aid that they desperately need. But ultimately, the end of this conflict will only come when the parties agree on a plan for a political transition in accordance with the Geneva Communique of 2012. And we have no illusions about how difficult that is. No one here is, following some pipe dream in this effort. People fully understand that compromise will be necessary, that it will be essential to resolve very tough issues that are outstanding. But without a political transition, it is not possible to achieve peace. Today, all ISSG members agree that the Geneva talks should resume as soon as possible, and they should resume in strict compliance with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. And the ISSG also pledges all of us to take every single measure we can to facilitate progress within the negotiations. In December, we agreed on a 6-month time frame for the political transition process. And today, we reaffirmed our commitment to that timeline. We approach this, I think, with a uniform belief that the killing and the starvation of innocent people needs to end as soon as possible. Now, obviously, and just in closing, I'll say, our hard work is obviously far from over. But our work today, while it has produced commitments on paper, I want to restate, the real test is clearly whether or not all the parties honor those commitments and implement them in reality. What I've said again and again is we cannot guarantee success in the outcome. What the diplomatic process can guarantee is that we exhaust the possibilities of diplomacy and that we make every best effort to try to produce a platform on which the parties themselves can determine their future. That is what we're trying to do here. The longer this conflict persists, the better it is for extremists. The more people like Daesh profit. And they have found a safe haven in war-torn Syria, and we are determined that we're going to continue and upgrade and increase our efforts to degrade and destroy Daesh as fast as possible. I am hopeful that the progress we're making here will be real, that we'll be able to see this reduction in violence, which everybody accepted as a fundamental organizing principle of this effort, and that within this week we can get the modalities secured for the cooperation necessary to be able to produce a ceasefire. We also agreed in the ISSG that there's no way to institute a ceasefire effectively, and no way to produce the access we want to humanitarian assistance without all of the ISSG members working with Russia and others in an effort to guarantee that the access is provided and that the cessation of hostilities actually takes hold. And to that end, we have agreed, all of us, to work with Russia in a way that deals with the political, the humanitarian, and the military components of this challenge. Second.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Ladies and gentlemen, to add on what John has said, I would like to first of all to join gratitude towards our German hosts, to thank the team of the UN for the efforts that they have taken. This meeting was opportune because we've been worried about these issues that had arisen with the implementation of the agreements that we had reached at our previous meetings. And the main result of today's meeting, as I believe, is the unconditional confirmation of the Resolution 2254 in full. This refers to humanitarian aspects, political process, anti-terrorism, ceasefire, with exception for such terrorist organizations who have been recognized as such by the United Nations Security Council. We have considered all issues that impede the implementation of the resolution. John has mentioned some of them. Special attention has been paid to the humanitarian situation for obvious reasons. This situation is aggravating, and to solve this problem in order to implement all our other agreements, we need joint work, collective work. And we are advocating this work, and we have been calling for this work since the very beginning of our airspace operation in Syria. And our colleagues becoming more and more aware of the need of such operation, and we're happy about that. As for humanitarian problems, we are satisfied that today we've managed to agree on principles of their solution, on the idea that access will be provided throughout Syria to all besieged areas without any exception. This will be done in an integrated manner so as not to discriminate anyone and not to solve problems by ignoring other parts of the country. We've been concerned in particular by the fact that previous efforts of the United Nations, when such decisions were being considered together with the government and the opposition, were disrupted at the fault of the latter. John mentioned Madaya, Fua, Kafraya. The UN has been for a very long time working together with the Red Cross committee to provide simultaneous supply of humanitarian assistance to all of these settlements, and the government was responsible for making these possible. With regard to Madaya, opposition promised to open the way for humanitarian supplies to Fuaya and Kafraya. Last month, the government has met its part of obligations. The opposition has refused from its promises. The UN and the Red Cross Committee had to make statements condemning such refusals. Now, when we have written down the need of an integrated approach towards all these problems, I hope that the opposition and those who control various groups of opposition will have no more reasons to somehow avoid meeting their obligations. As John said, we have agreed to set up a task force which will have a meeting tomorrow in Geneva and will be working on a regular basis, co-chaired by Russia and the United States, with the participation of experts. And the goal of this task force is to help the UN and other humanitarian agencies to carry out their obligations with regard to civilians. We have developed a mechanism which will allow to objectively consider difficulties that may arise and to find prompt solutions of these situations. As it is written down in today's documents, we will work together with the government, opposition groups which are in contact with us, and we hope that the US and countries in the region and other participants of the International Syria Support Group will use their influence on the relevant opposition group so that they cooperated fully with the United Nations. We have our common determination to help alleviate sufferings of the Syrian people, and we hope that this will be achieved. This is especially important given that some of recent events relating to the humanitarian problem in Syria related to refugees only, and they had nothing to do with the destinies of a huge number of internally displaced people. So we have reasons to hope that we've done a good and useful job today and that it will be implemented in practice. We welcome the readiness of the US and some other countries to join operations that the Russian side, together with the Syrian government, is carrying out to airdrop humanitarian assistance from aircraft in Deir ez-Zor, where there is the greatest number of civilians that are besieged. We have also agreed to use parachuting of humanitarian assistance in some other areas where it is possible. But the biggest part of efforts we will have to make on the ground. The second point that is an important achievement of today's meeting is the issue of ceasefire, and as a first step towards it, that is the cessation of hostilities. This is a complicated task. There are too many stakeholders involved in military activities, and it is important to use the unique potential of the International Syria Support Group, which unites almost all countries that have some kind of leverage on those fighting on the ground. We have agreed to prepare modalities during a week which will determine the ceasefire, the regime of cessation of hostilities, given that during this period the government of Syria and opposition groups will be able to take necessary measures to prepare for the cessation of hostilities, and modalities will be developed by another task force which we have also set up today, as John had said, which will be working under co-chaired by Russia and the US as well. It will include diplomats and the military, without whom it is extremely difficult to deal with practical issues. The modalities which we will have to develop are important, and I would also like to emphasize the agreement that the mandate of this task force will include, in particular, the determination of common approaches towards those areas that are under control of ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, and other terrorist groups that have been qualified as such by the UN Security Council. As you probably know, during all these months, we had quite an emotional discussion on who is targeting right